What is logic? The class is called critical thinking, but it is more or less what we may call logic. It's the part of philosophy called logic. What is it? It comes from an ancient Greek word logike, which originally meant the word or what is spoken. And that already tells you quite a bit about what logic is. It can be defined as an organized body of knowledge that evaluates arguments. And arguments is not, how people think argument is when two people yell at each other. You don't have to yell at each other. Argument is something you present to support your point of view, or somebody else presents and you can evaluate their point of view. Now, as you can probably immediately notice, it is closely related to language, the word of what is spoken. How important the language is? Well, even if you look at the Bible, John 1:1, it says, "In the beginning there was Word." So that already kind of tells you, even if you don't believe in God, doesn't matter, but it still is very wise thing. Why? Because language is extremely important. Let's do this thought experiment. Philosophers love thought experiments, so let's try. Let's see if you can imagine yourself, after you were born, to be taken to an uninhabited island where there's no human beings, only animals, and you grow up with monkeys. There's actually some real stories about Mowgli or whatever, right? Would you be the person you are today? Would you be a person? Probably not, right? You probably would be a monkey. You would not have a name, right? Where would you get a name? You would not think of yourself as I, because the word I has particular meaning. You learn it from other people. You wouldn't even have thoughts. How would you have a thought? How would you think to yourself, maybe tomorrow I should go to the beach? No words, right? You would have impulses. You suddenly feel like you need to have a banana, you grab the banana and you eat it. That's about it. An animal. That's it. The language is what makes you a human being. And the language has been developed over thousands and thousands of years from human being to human being. So when you learn it, you actually get this knowledge accumulated by all these generations all at once. And then it seems easy to you, but it's really not that easy. There's lots of things going on. And the way you communicate with other people is extremely important. When you try to achieve something in life, whatever it may be, get a bachelor's degree or something, or even get a new car, you have to communicate with other people, they have to communicate with you. You have to explain to them what do you want. You have to get them to do something for you. Suppose you want a job, right? What do? You go for an interview and you present an argument to them, trying to explain to them why you're a good person to be hired for this particular position. And they either accept your argument or not. So anywhere in life, you will always encounter arguments, you'll be making arguments, especially in colleges, of course, because college is like one place where you constantly do that. All your papers, all your presentations is kind of arguments. So it's very important. Language is important, and being able to present yourself well is important. It goes back all the way to ancient Greece. The person who gave us this body of knowledge called logic, the first one who actually worked on it in a sustained manner, structured manner, was Aristotle. Aristotle lived between 384 BC and 322 BC. This is BC means before Christ, before Common Era. So right now we are in the year 2020, right? So how many years ago was it? Well, he was born 384, that means 384 plus 2020, 2,404 years ago. He was born 2,404 years ago, and he already laid out these rules of logic. We will not be talking very much, or almost at all, about Aristotle himself, although I will mention him periodically. If you want to know more about Aristotle, you should take Philosophy 101. Philosophy 101 is actually general philosophy. It goes not just Logic actually is not a big part of it, but it goes into other areas of philosophy. The entire philosophy as it was throughout history of humankind. So it's much broader in scope. This is where we talk about Plato, Aristotle, and so on. I teach it every semester. I will teach it next semester. If you're interested, you can take it. In this class, we will not really talk about that, although the book does have bits and pieces about Aristotle and other important philosophers who contributed to the study of logic. And there are quite a few of them. So if you want to know more, you can read it from the book. For our purposes, it's enough to say that he was the first, and actually if you ever read him, you will see that a lot of the stuff we do in this class 2,400 years ago was already there in his writings. You will recognize them. The definition, syllogisms, all this stuff comes back to Aristotle. Now, for many centuries, logic remained largely unchanged. There were some improvements during medieval time and so on, but it was very, very similar overall. The huge breakthrough came in the 19th century, not that long ago. There are such philosophers as Frege, Whitehead, Bertrand Russell. They developed mathematical logic. Mathematical logic is formal logic, is the one of the things which we will learn a little bit about, but it is applied to mathematics, and if you ever take classes in higher level mathematics classes, the proofs in mathematics are written using the rules of logic. Now after that, what actually happened is it has been used in the 20th century in computer science. The computer science, computer programs, all based on logic. So essentially, if you ask yourself why logic is so important other than language, well, computers, all the computers, all your cell phones, all of the internet, all of this based on the rules of logic. So that is another area. If you specialize in computer science, you write programs. Programs are written in computer language. That's why it is language, because it actually is following the rules of logic. What is the aim of logic? Well, for our purposes, we can say very simply, the aim of logic is to develop a system of methods and principles that we may use as criteria for evaluating arguments of others and guides in constructing arguments of our own. Meaning, we can determine whether the argument somebody presents is a good one or a bad one. We will talk about good and bad arguments today a little bit more, but generally that's the idea. And when you make your own argument, you want it to be good. You don't want it to be bad. What are the good and bad arguments? Like I said, we'll talk in a few minutes. So among the benefits expected from the study of logic is increase in confidence. Of course, if you are able to present your point of view more logically, you will have better results, and therefore you'll be more confident doing so. And if you criticize somebody, if you want to point to logical fallacies or something, you also want to know what are the logical fallacies, and we'll go over that as well. Okay, now 1.1, arguments, premises, and conclusions. This is what will be on the first homework. Let's look at that. So again, everyone reasons, everyone thinks. We talk about arguments. What are the arguments? How are they generated? What specifically do we call an argument? Okay, an argument for our purposes, this is a formal definition, is a group of statements, one or more of which, called the premises, are claimed to provide support for or reasons to believe one of the others, called the conclusion. Here's an example of an argument. This is nicely structured argument, what is known in logic as syllogism. Syllogism is an argument with two premises and one conclusion. Something simple like this. By the way, goes all the way back to Aristotle. So, this is a syllogism. All biologists are scientists. John is not a scientist, so John is not a biologist. It is an argument, it has two premises, and it has a conclusion. What are the premises? The premises are the statements that set forth reasons or evidence. Something like this. If Alice stole the diamonds, then she is a thief. And Alice did steal the diamonds. These are two premises. Note that the first premise here gives you a hypothetical. If Alice stole the diamonds, then she is a thief. You may agree or disagree, which is what makes it true or false, right? Second premise gives you more positive statement. It says Alice did steal the diamonds. Now, can you figure out what conclusion follows from that? She is guilty. Okay, well it says if Alice stole the diamond, then she is a thief. Alice did steal the diamonds. She is guilty of what? She is a thief. Yeah, see, the premises are if Alice stole the diamonds, then she is a thief. Alice did steal the diamonds. What's the conclusion? The conclusion obviously is she is a thief. Based on what you just told, that's the conclusion which follows from that very clearly. Hence, Alice is a thief. So in this case, you can see what the conclusion will be. Note that in some arguments, conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. It doesn't have to be. That's what the bad argument would be. The conclusion will not be following from the premises. It may even seem like it does, but it doesn't. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. So again, this is the division we make right now, when we will classify them better as we go along. But the very simple division would be two groups of arguments, the good ones and the bad ones. And we can say that the whole purpose of logic, to put it very, very simply, is to distinguish one from the other. To figure out which arguments are good, which arguments are bad. Trust me, it's not as easy as it may seem at first, and you will see even today. Sometimes it may seem at first that this is a good argument, but it actually is not, and the other way around. So we have a very sophisticated methods in logic to evaluate arguments. So when you learn these methods, you will be able to determine whether the argument is good or bad. Now, we did say that argument is a group of statements, right? So what exactly is a statement? Is any sentence a statement? No. A statement is a sentence which is either true or false. There's his examples. Chocolate truffles are loaded with calories. That's a statement, because it's either true or false, right? Melatonin helps relieve jet lag. Same thing. Political candidates always tell the truth. The complete truth. Well, I doubt it, but nonetheless, it is a statement, because it is either true or false. No wives ever cheat on their husbands. And finally, Tiger Woods plays golf and Maria Sharapova plays tennis. Note, in the last one, we actually have two statements. Why are they two statements? Because each one of them can be true or false. Tiger Woods plays golf. Is it true? Yes. Maria Sharapova plays tennis. Is it true? Yes. So the whole thing is true. Suppose it was something like Tiger Woods plays golf and Maria Sharapova plays ice hockey. Note that then we would have one statement which is true, the other one which is false. So what's the value of the whole thing? Well, we will learn as we go along. For now, it doesn't matter. The point right now is, in order for a sentence to be a statement, it has to be either true or false. We call it the truth value. Truth value of a statement is either true or false. Each statement would always have a truth value, because it has to be either true or false. In this case, the book tells us the first two are true, the second two are false, and then the last one has two statements, both of them are true. Now, again, not all sentences are statements. What sentences are not statements? For example, questions, proposals, suggestions, commands, and exclamations. They are sentences, but they are not statements. Why not? Because they cannot be true or false. Here's some examples. Where's her tomb? Is it true? Is it false? It's just a question, right? Somebody is asking, where's her tomb? Let's go to a movie tonight. Well, it is a proposal. You may disagree, you may say, I don't want to go to the movie. That doesn't make it false, right? But it doesn't make it true either. I suggest you get contact lenses. What's a suggestion? Again, it's neither true nor false. Turn off the TV right now. Something your mom may tell you or something. Right? It's a command. The commands, again, are not statements. They are sentences. But they are not statements because they are neither true nor false. Somebody tells you to turn off the TV. You can tell them to go to hell. That still doesn't make it false. And finally, exclamations. Something like fantastic, great. In this case, you may disagree that it's fantastic or great. However, that expresses the feeling of a person who is saying that. So for this reason, it's neither true nor false. It's just an exclamation or damn or whatever. Anytime it's an exclamation, it is neither true nor. So back to premises and the conclusion. The statements, and now you know what statements are, the statements that make up an argument divided into one or more premises and the conclusion. Let's look at them a little more carefully. So the premises are the statements that set forth the reasons or evidence of some sort to support your conclusion. And the conclusion is the statement that evidence is claimed to support or imply. Here's another example. Either Bill has a poor memory or he is lying. Bill does not have a poor memory. Therefore, Bill is lying. Note that you have these two, again, premises, and from these two premises you can draw this conclusion that Bill is lying. Every single time you will have something like this. This is actually from the book. Nice picture which shows you have the premise or premises. It has to be at least one premise. And you have the conclusion. So every argument has to have these two components. There may be more than one premise, but there has to be at least one. If you don't have any premises, if you don't have anything which claims this evidence, gives you some sort of reason to believe the conclusion, then it's not an argument. It's just one statement. And then there should be a conclusion following from that. Now let's look at good and bad arguments. This is kind of interesting. So this is a good argument. It's already told you, they already tell you that it is a good argument. All film stars are celebrities. Halle Berry is a film star. Therefore, Halle Berry is a celebrity. Now it's easy to see that it is a good argument, right? Because we all know, hopefully, who Halle Berry is. Naturally, we already know she is a film star and she is a celebrity. But even if you did not know that, based on the premises, based on what you are given here, you could already correctly conclude that she is a celebrity. Why? Well, let me do this one on the board, and in order to do it on the board, I'll make myself bigger. So, again, the argument is all film stars are celebrities. Halle Berry is a film star, therefore Halle Berry is a celebrity. Let's try to graphically represent what it says. All film stars are celebrities. So if you have celebrities, as a circle, you can draw another circle, and where would it be? Inside of it, which would be film stars. This is what the first premise tells you. If you think about it, all film stars are celebrities means that the circle of film stars completely included in this bigger circle of celebrities. There are celebrities which are not film stars. But if you're a film star, you are a celebrity. You are right here inside this bigger circle. The next premise tells you Halle Berry is a film star. Where would you put Halle Berry? If you put her as a dot, where would that dot go? In film stars, right? That's what it tells you. She's a film star. Now, is there any way she is inside the smaller circle, but not inside the bigger circle? Is it possible? Well, you look at it, you immediately say, no, it's not possible. If all film stars are indeed celebrities, and Halle Berry is indeed a film star, she has to be a celebrity. There's just no way around it. And this is why it's a good argument. Even if you didn't know Halle Berry, if somebody told you Benedetto Benjedto is a film star. Based on that, you would immediately be able to conclude that, well, then Benjedto is a celebrity. There's really no way around it. Okay, so this is why it is a good argument, because your conclusion here follows from your premises with strict necessity in this case. Strict necessity. It's absolutely necessary, assuming premises are true, the conclusion will also be true. And keep in mind, again, in logic, that when we are given an argument, we by default assume that the premises are true. If we try to figure out in each and every single case whether the premises really are true or not, we will go completely insane. Because lots of these things, it requires knowledge about the world which you may not have. For the purposes of logic, we're just looking at it like, okay, assuming premises are true, would this conclusion follow from that? In this case, yes. Yes, it would. Now, let's look at another example of a bad argument. Some film stars are men. Cameron Diaz is a film star, therefore Cameron Diaz is a man. Now, again, you may be tempted to say, well, of course it's a bad argument. Why? Because we all know Cameron Diaz is not a man, it's a woman. Well, while it is true, but again, it's not a bad argument for this reason. It is a bad argument for reason similar to why the first one was a good argument, which is the conclusion simply does not follow from your premises. So let's go back to the board and let's see how this one works. So this is how we did the previous example. Now let's look at this example. First premise tells us some film stars are men. What does it mean? How do we draw that? Well, if this is film stars, the circle of men would have to partially overlap it. This is what it tells you. So there are men who are not film stars, and there are film stars who are not men, and there are also film stars who are men. Now, second premise tells you Cameron Diaz is a film star. What does it mean? It means that this little dot of Cameron Diaz should go inside this circle of film stars. Right? Let me do it in red. Inside this circle. But where? No, this is crucially important. Because if it is here, then yeah, it is true that Cameron Diaz would be a man. But if it is here, then it actually is false. That actually is how it is in real life. Cameron Diaz is a woman. So she is here. Everything is what the argument told you, but the conclusion here does not follow. The conclusion Cameron Diaz is a man would only follow if you could clearly see, based on your premises, that there's no way the conclusion would not follow from them. And there is a way. Of course there is a way. And knowing reality, we can say, of course it's false because Cameron Diaz is a woman, but even again, if it was Brindisi or something. Some film stars are men, Brindisi is a film star. Does it mean Brindisi is a man? No. Brindisi could be a woman. Based on what you just told, the conclusion does not follow. And this is why it is a bad argument. Okay. So we will periodically do it this way on the board. Not every time, but nonetheless, hopefully you guys can see why, because it's the best way for me to explain it to you, and hopefully it will help you to understand. Okay, you should be able to see everything correctly. If there are any issues, like I said, try to adjust your settings, and then you may want to rewatch some parts of it or all of it later. But unfortunately, we can't spend too much time trying to get everybody to get the correct picture, because otherwise everybody else will be just sitting there bored and wasting their time, right? So let's move on. How do you identify the conclusion and the premises? Well, one way is to look for indicator words. Indicator words actually help you greatly. There are specific words which, if you see them, you would know that conclusion probably follows. This is the list. Therefore, wherefore, thus, consequently, remain, for, accordingly, and so on. This is a list of words which will help you. If you see any of these words, such as the word therefore, whatever goes after this word would be your conclusion. Note that the word therefore itself is not part of the conclusion, but whatever follows this word, that would be your conclusion. Let's look at the example. Let's look at this passage. Tortured prisoners will say anything just to relieve the pain. Consequently, torture is not a reliable method of interrogation. So what exactly is the conclusion here? Consequently is the indicator word, which tells you that the conclusion is coming up. Yes. The conclusion is torture is not a reliable method of interrogation. Again, consequently is an indicator word, not the conclusion, but it does tell you that the conclusion is whatever follows that. Torture is not a reliable method of interrogation. Why? Because tortured prisoners will say anything just to relieve pain. That is your premise. This is what tells you, gives you evidence to support your conclusion. Gives you reasons to support your conclusion. Premises also have indicator words such as since, as indicated by, because, for, in that, and so on. This is helpful to identify premises, because sometimes you may have no indicator words for the conclusion, but you may have indicator words for premises. That could help you too. Let's look at another example. Expectant mothers should never use recreational drugs, since the use of these drugs can jeopardize the development of the fetus. Now, one important thing I always tell students, the first thing you always try to identify is the conclusion, because this is the most important part of the argument. So what would be the conclusion here? So the conclusion is that use of drugs jeopardize the development of the fetus? Or is it the other way around? It is the other way around. Expectant mothers should never use recreational drugs. That's the conclusion. The fact that the use of drugs jeopardizes the development of the fetus is the reason. It's what supports your conclusion, right? Because the use of these drugs jeopardizes the fetus, that's why expectant mothers should never use recreational drugs. So note that it is important what is the conclusion, what is the premise. And the premise, again, is indicated by the indicator word since. The indicator word since tells you that whatever follows it, the use of these drugs can jeopardize the development of the fetus. That would be your premise. Okay, so this is, again, all of this laid out there. I'm not going to dwell on every single slide, because the slides, some of them just meant to help you if you are not listening to me, but just going through the PowerPoints on your own, right? But when we are in class, I don't see any point, spending 15 minutes on every slide. It will all be there for you to come back to later if you need to. Single indicator word could also identify more than one premise. This is a good example of that. Consider this argument. It is vitally important that wilderness areas be preserved, for wilderness provides essential habitat for wildlife, including endangered species, and it is a natural retreat from the stress of daily life. Let's think about it. What is going on in this particular argument? What is the conclusion here? Yes, the conclusion doesn't always come first. It can come anywhere in the argument. In logic, when we want to lay out an argument properly, we write it down so that conclusion actually is last. But in speech and in writing, people do it any way they want. And since we are evaluating arguments made by other people, we have to be able to find the conclusion wherever it is. Yes, it is vitally important that wilderness areas be preserved. That is your conclusion. Now, what is going on with the premise? Is there one premise or two premises? There's actually two premises. How do you know there are two premises? There are two separate statements here, right? Each one of them supports your conclusion, even independently. One is wilderness provides essential habitat for wildlife, and the other one, including endangered species, and the other one, it is natural retreat from stress of daily life. Each one of them is actually good enough to support your conclusion. They are connected by the word and. They are indicated by the word for. So it's kind of like for this reason and this reason. You will see that in speech and in writing it can go in variety of ways. So this is the slide which explains that. Sometimes arguments have no indicator words, as you probably already figured out. Indicator words are helpful, we should know them, but if there is no indicator word, what do? Again, look for the conclusion. The conclusion would be a main point of your argument. What's the arguer trying to prove? What is his main point? That would be your conclusion. And whatever serves to support that, that would be your premises. Maybe one thing, it may be more than one thing. Take a look at the next example. We must get serious about modernizing our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Many of our bridges are practically falling down, and our transit system is in dire need of repair. Furthermore, making these improvements would create jobs for millions of workers. What is the conclusion here? Now note that the fact that the infrastructure is crumbling, if that was the conclusion, then what would be the reasoning? The reasoning would be just telling you that it is crumbling. But is the conclusion that it's crumbling, or is the conclusion that we should do something about the fact that it's crumbling? It actually is the second. The conclusion is that we must get serious about modernizing our nation's crumbling infrastructure, not just that it is crumbling. If you wanted to prove that it is crumbling, what would you say? Well, something like, you see that it is crumbling. But in this case, they give you more. For example, sometimes students even think that the conclusion is that making these improvements would create millions of jobs. Now, note that this is not the conclusion, but it is one of the reasons why we should get serious about modernizing our crumbling infrastructure, because it will create jobs. So it's one of the things. Note that if you lay it out properly, this is how you would lay it out in logic. Again, remember, in logic the conclusion will go last. So premise number one, P1, many of our bridges are practically falling down. Premise number two, our transit system is in dire need of repair. Premise number three, making these improvements would create jobs for millions of workers. And conclusion, we must get serious about modernizing our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Note that these are three separate reasons provided which support this conclusion. Why should we modernize, get serious about modernizing? Well, because bridges are falling down. Another reason, transit system is in dire need of repair. And finally, because it will create jobs. That's just one more reason to get serious about it. Okay. You can have statements there which are neither premises nor conclusion. Why in the world would you have that? Well, if it's in writing or speeches, people often put statements in to introduce the topic or to color it up in some way. If it's creative writing especially, you do want to make it more interesting than just laying out these logical arguments which may seem a little dry. So let's look at some examples of that. Well, regarding the writing, like there is a question, is there reason strategies that a writer use when placing premise before conclusion and vice versa? It depends on your purposes and what you're writing. Remember, this is not really a writing class, so we're evaluating arguments, but I don't really, not really trying to teach you how to write a good essay. That's more of an English 101. I'm sure that in English 101 they'll talk more about what you can achieve by placing it in a strategic way in your essay or an argument. However, in this class we'll just look at whether the result makes a good argument or not. Okay, so once again, let's look at this example. What is unnecessary here? The claim is often made that malpractice lawsuits drive up the cost of healthcare. But if such suits were outlawed and severely restricted, then parents would have no means of recovery for injuries caused by negligent doctors. Hence, the availability of malpractice litigation should be maintained intact. Again, first, identify your conclusion. What is your conclusion? Then you will see that perhaps something is not there in order to serve the reasoning for your conclusion. Something is unnecessary. So the question now is, what is unnecessary? Based on that, what is unnecessary here? Second sentence, so if such suits were outlawed or merely restricted, then patients would have no means of recovery. So what is the conclusion? Think about the conclusion. The conclusion here is also indicated by the word hence. The conclusion is rather clear. The availability of malpractice litigation should be maintained intact. Right? So what here does not support this conclusion? Exactly, the first sentence. The claim is often made that malpractice lawsuits drive up the cost of healthcare. How is it supporting your conclusion? Your conclusion that availability of malpractice litigation should be maintained intact. It doesn't support your conclusion in any way. What is it? It's an introductory sentence. It just introduces the topic. It says, well, some people are saying that malpractice lawsuits drive up the cost of healthcare. So let's look at it. Let's make an argument. And then they give you an argument. Right? So the second sentence actually does serve a purpose to prove your conclusion. The conclusion is that availability of malpractice litigation should be maintained intact is supported by the fact if such suits were outlawed or severely restricted, patients would have no means of recovery for injuries caused by negligent doctors. That's why. That's why the availability should be maintained intact. Okay. Let's look at another example. What's unnecessary here? Massive federal deficit push up interest rates for everyone. Servicing the debt gobbles up a huge portion of federal budget, which lowers our standard of living. The big deficits also weaken the value of the dollar. For these reasons, Congress must make a determined effort to cut overall spending and raise taxes. Politicians who ignore this reality imperil the future of our nation. Yeah, so the first thing to do is to identify the conclusion, and exactly right. I can see that Christian already did that. So the conclusion is whatever follows the word for these reasons. Congress must make a determined effort to cut overall spending and raise taxes. That is the conclusion. Now what supports it and what doesn't? Massive federal deficit push up interest rates for everyone. Well, it obviously supports the conclusion. Servicing the debt gobbles up huge portion of the federal budget, which lowers the standard of living. That supports the conclusion. Big deficit weakens the value of the dollar. That supports the conclusion. So yeah, the last sentence, politicians who ignore this reality imperil the future of nation. That does not support the conclusion. That's just the way the person who says that feels about the issue. That's his personal opinion, which he kind of throws in there in the end. It's not part of the argument because it does nothing to support the conclusion, either on its own or in connection with other reasoning which has been given here. Yeah, okay. So good. Looks like you are getting a grip of it. If you are not, then homework and everything will help you out.